Thank you for joining us for an episode of All About PR. If you're tuning in for the first time, on this podcast, we speak to experts from the field of PR and communication from across the world and bring you an interesting conversation on the subject every week. In today's episode, we delve into new age independent media, which I personally believe has come of age in India this year. They have created a thriving ecosystem for themselves that allows them to create stories for a niche and loyal audience. Though, has the Indian PR industry caught up with them? What is the ROI, tangible and intangible, and how do you engage them? Today, Aekta Kapoor, editor and publisher eShe magazine, joins us on the podcast to help us understand how to add this powerful ace in your PR campaigns. If you don't know this already, Aekta is the founder of eShe magazine, an independent women's magazine and blog based in India and Canada that celebrates the extraordinary stories of women around the world. Currently ranked 23rd among the top women's magazine in the world by Feedspot, eShe has touched the lives of millions of women and men worldwide since its launch in July 2017. And it's a brilliant read. If you haven't read it already, log on to it today. So let's add her on. Hi Ekta, thank you for joining us today for the podcast.
Hi Taranjeet, I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Lovely to speak to you as always. So, Ekta, before we get started, can you share with our listeners what prompted you to start your own platform? And if I may say so, it's a wonderful one at that. But why did you start?
Actually, I come from an industry background more inclined towards fashion media. And what I felt over the years working in that space was that the content we were creating wasn't necessarily uplifting. It wasn't necessarily inspiring women. On the contrary, there have been surveys that found that 70% of readers feel depressed after reading a fashion magazine because of the physical and the overall image that they project of women as being perfect in all ways. So that was one of the things that had been nagging me for a while. Also, I wanted to be part of creating change in a positive way. I wanted to be able to use my voice as a writer, as an editor, to create stories of hope, to create stories that gave inspiration to women rather than making them want to aspire to an impossible ideal. So that was actually the motivation for me personally to start a magazine like eShe, where we do stories of real women, real regular women from their day-to-day life. We do not Photoshop what they look like. We don't try to gloss over the uncomfortable realities that they must be living through. Because the truth is that you can never be a success unless you have been through difficult journeys in your life. And to gloss over all the uncomfortable parts and to focus only on the positive parts, that's a little unrealistic. So for me, that was the whole point, to show real stories of how women achieve what they do achieve, and to leave readers with a sense of hope that if she can do it, I can do it. So that was the whole idea.
Interesting. So, I want to know, while I think it's easy to put up a blog or start a social media page, registering and starting a media company is a whole different ballgame. So, were there any legalities involved when you decided that you're going to be a media house?
eShe is syndicated to other news platforms. So in terms of our content, we need to have that level of journalistic integrity. Otherwise, they wouldn't want to take those stories from us.
So, what were the legalities involved?
For me, I did apply for an RNI, which is a Registrar of Newspapers of India registration number, basically. But I have not been successful in that, I'll be honest with you. The lockdown created another further problem, and I don't know whether I'll be able to now restart the process and do it again. So that has been a challenge. That is a roadblock that I've faced. But I have been successful in registering eShe as a trademark, and also our property Shine Your Light, that's also registered as a trademark. So in some ways, yes, there are certain legalities. You want to protect your brand. So you want to do what it requires to protect your brand. And also, I believe now with the new Ministry of Information and Broadcasting notification that digital media is going to come under their domain. It already was actually, but maybe there will be certain other legalities I'll have to do in the future. But as of now, we are pretty free to publish what we want on the internet. We don't have to take permission to publish a digital magazine, not so far. But as somebody who wants to create a good brand, I think you have to monitor yourself and self-censor yourself, because you cannot create a credible brand if you're going to do stupid things. So, and if you're going to try and just raise your hits by doing ridiculous stories, that's not a good way to go if you're trying to make a brand. So I think keeping that in mind as a digital media, we don't have to follow legalities, but we have to follow good practices. We have to follow what is right.
Let me reframe the question a little bit, right? How easy or difficult is it to start a publication in India?
It's not easy to start a print publication because you need a lot of legal paperwork to be done to register yourself. And you have to be tied up with a printer who has a license to print. And not many people were willing to help me. Even my former employers in the media were not willing to give me that certificate and to support me for that. So I had to go to another printer through other networks. But because they were also not a very big printer, they were not an old printer, let's put it that way, because these particular rules and certifications were given many years ago. So that is why even they were not able to, though they tried to help me, but it wasn't successful. So it's a little difficult for somebody, a new media house, to come up with a magazine and to be registered as a media house which is bringing out a print product. Now, I think the reason a lot of online platforms have been coming is because they don't have to deal with these problems. You can just register your website and you can just start the next day. So there isn't any as such a barrier so far to start a media website.
Right. And how will this change once the more rules come into play?
We'll have to wait and see. At the moment, they are looking more at OTT brands like Hotstar and Netflix. So they're looking more towards those, and they're not really clear about what they're going to do in terms of online media. But definitely there will be, I think, in a few years, we will see a little more laws coming into place in this arena as well. You might have to register yourself in a certain way, and only then you can publish certain information. But it's very difficult to monitor the entire internet space, and there's always going to be niche websites that target a certain kind of an audience, which may not be coming under those categories of news websites. So they will not have any rules, and then even news websites can kind of change their description so that they don't fall under that ambit. So we'll have to wait and see what exactly is going to happen. But as of now, there are no rules. There's nothing written down that you need to follow it. If you follow it, you're following it because you have the intention of creating a brand and a name for yourself for a certain product.
So it's a wait and watch situation
right now.
So, this year we've also seen a lot of independent media evolve. How has this year changed for you? Has it been a game changer for you in any way?
Actually, our hits have gone up during the lockdown. It's more than double of what it used to be. And
Really?
also because people were reading more, I think sitting at home, they were reading more digital media. People had stopped buying newspapers for a while in the middle. So they had switched to e-edition. So in that sense, I think digital media has seen a growth probably this year. But that doesn't necessarily translate to good business growth, because your income is going to come from somebody who wants to advertise a product. And if their market is crashing and if they're running out of business, they're not likely to advertise at this point. So there has been growth in terms of numbers of visibility and more people reading, which is, for me, it's equally a fulfilling situation.
Absolutely. But I think at some point of time, revenue also has to go in if you are to grow. How do you see that panning out for independent media?
Revenue is, of course, a problem. It was a problem even in mainstream media. It's a problem even for print media, because models of media are dependent on advertisers. And if advertisers aren't making money, they're not likely to spend on you. There are newspapers that will give you a full page for a certain very less amount of money, which was unheard of a few years ago. So even the mainstream media is going through that challenge. And for me, actually, it's interesting, but I've seen more interest from subscribers. They're actually encouraging me to start a subscription model. And there have been people who have been voluntarily donating on the website because they want to see us keep going. So for me, that has been an interesting development this year. And I've noticed that over the last few years, a lot of subscription models have come up and people are now paying. I myself subscribe to a lot of different websites which have a subscription model, and I don't mind it. And I think that that's money well spent. So I think a lot of buyers are actually waking up to that you don't necessarily get used to very free media. The younger generation is used to having free media. They get all their information from social media, and for them, they think that is enough. But then there is a growing breed of people who realize that if you want quality content, you have to pay for it. And I think it's good. I think we're going to move to a more healthy model where people are willing to pay for good content, and that's going to be good for the industry because you're not going to be dependent on the advertiser anymore.
So that brings an interesting question. What is the typical profile of the subscribers reading interesting information? I know I am one of them, but I'd like to hear it from you.
I think anybody who likes reading or who's a regular reader, who has spent money on buying books and magazines, I think that person is a good model for a reader. And it's funny because India is such a huge country with such a huge population, but we are not readers, except for a few pockets of ground. For instance, in Kerala, almost I think every family has lots of newspapers coming home and things like that. But in most parts of India, people don't read as much. And they say that there are more bookshops in London than there are in metro cities of India. So there's a huge scope, I think, for this. And if more people start reading and more people are showing interest in quality reading, it's a huge scope for people who are bringing out good quality content, because you know that there is going to be a section of people who want to read. They could be anybody. They could be students. They could be professionals. They could be older people, retired people. It doesn't matter. If you like reading, I think you'll be willing to pay for good quality content, and you'll get tired of all the social media noise that you keep hearing, and you'll eventually want to settle down on a product that you like reading.
Absolutely. And I think it's already beginning to happen. It's just a question of reaching that critical mass.
Yeah, I think it's also more a question of education. We may have reached a 70% literacy or 80% literacy, but that doesn't mean that we have become readers, unfortunately. The reading population of the country is very low. So that will happen only with education, and if every generation, teachers, parents, if they encourage children to read, that's the only way that we'll be able to see change coming in the next generation. And I hope that the more kind of good content we create, the more the children themselves will be attracted to it and they'll want to subscribe to these things in the future.
Absolutely. They'll be my kind of people. Let's come to PR. How do your rules differ as compared to traditional media? The PR industry is used to a certain way of working, especially when they deal with traditional media. When it comes to independent media and with unique media like yours, how do your rules differ for them?
See, one of the biggest differences is that mainstream media, you have separate teams for editorial and marketing. So the PR people would normally be dealing with the editorial team and they wouldn't be necessarily dealing with the publisher's department. But what happens in a niche media is the lines are very blurred. I am the editor, but I'm also the publisher of my own magazine. So I have to look into both, and the line is very blurred for me. In my mind, of course, it's clear to me that if a brand is coming to me and they want a coverage for their brand exclusively, they want me to feature the client, and the coverage that they're going to generate out of that is going to help the business of the client, then for me, it's clearly a business transaction and I would like to be paid for it. I would like to let's make it officially a sponsored post, because that is then helping my bottom line as well. But if you go to a mainstream publication, the rules were different. You would be dealing with the reporters and the way you would deal with them would be very different. So in that sense, things are a little different now, and the editorial team is going to be becoming more business-like with you. Unless the story fits into their vision and it fits into what they're looking for, they're not going to be very interested. If, for instance, in the old days, a lot of brands would send you products for review, and for a reporter who is earning a very modest salary to try out those luxury products would be incentive enough to kind of give them a mention.
Right.
But that doesn't work anymore, because if I have to feature the brand, I'm spending money from my pocket to do that story. So I would rather that you pay me for it rather than give me, even if they're expensive products. That is not so much of a motivational factor anymore.
So, what I'm hearing is that the traditional tools of PR will not work anymore. All of them will need a rehaul from the PR professionals who want to continue to engage the media fraternity, irrespective of the size of the media house.
Yeah, and I think what can help all of us collaborate better, if you can understand what our needs are. So, on one hand, we have the need for quality content that fits in with our vision, and on the other hand, we have a need for money as well. So,
Right.
if you can be there for us in both those capacities, it can be beneficial. It can be a mutually beneficial relationship.
Absolutely. So, what would be your advice for PR professionals who want to collaborate with you?
I always tell them that first read the magazine and read the kind of stories we do, because then they'll know what kind of profiles we're looking for. What happens is that sometimes you may pitch a client, but you may pitch it in a very different way that may not be interesting for me. Or I may think that this is a brand, this is not an editorial story, this is a sponsored kind of a story. So I wouldn't be interested in taking it. But the same story, if you pitch it to me in a different way, and you understand that this is what I'm going to be looking for,
Right.
like in my case, I would be more interested in an inspirational journey of a woman. And she may be the head of a brand, but I may not want to just talk about her brand. I may be more interested in her personal story. So if you can pitch it to me that way, I'm more likely to take it. A lot of the people who contact me don't read eShe. They don't know what the brand is about. And they'll tell me, I have this new products coming on. Can you feature it in your products pages? And I'm like, we don't have a single products page. So I don't know what page you're talking about. So they don't read the magazine. They just kind of have assumptions about it. I think that's one of the things that you can tell at least the younger generation of people that they need to actually start reading the product before they make a pitch.
Really? I'm still surprised that still happens. This is one of the basics in PR without which one really should not be calling a journalist. So, all PR pros out there, please, 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 guys, do read, watch, listen to the medium you're pitching to, and maybe a few specific ones done by the journalist you want to pitch to before connecting with them. It'll really help.
Yeah, then it's just an empty email.
True. So, Ekta, I'm curious to know when you plan your content calendar, how do you plan out paid versus editorial content? How do you draw the balance to ensure that, the integrity of the publication is not questioned?
Yeah, so we don't have too much paid content. And like I said, during the lockdown, businesses have faced a lot of problems. So paid content hasn't really been happening a lot of late. Maybe once the market picks up and people are spending on marketing again, maybe it will pick up again. We've got actually more interest from foreign brands rather than Indian to be seen in the magazine. So I'm not sure if Indian brands are going to be considering advertising or paying for posts in magazines very soon, maybe in a year or so when things pick up again. So for me, it's always been interesting content, and it's been stories that are value to the reader. I would say about a little less than half, say maybe about 30 to 40% of the stories we do are generated through our PR feeds. They may not be stories that focus only on one person, though sometimes they are, and there are a lot of successful stories that we've done which have been pitched to us through PR people. But many of the stories are also stories that have a certain theme. So, for instance, in the current issue of eShe, in the December issue, there's a feature on 5 women-led beauty brands that are drawn from nature, that have nature-based ingredients. So we would have reached out to the PR of those brands to help us get interviews with those women. So in that sense, yeah, that kind of a story we do. But then it's also a story where we've done our duty to the reader as well. So we're giving them our recommendations of these products, and we have spoken to the owners of the products. So we are able to present a more holistic picture of that brand and to make the reader realize what is the vision behind it. And then, of course, if they choose to try that product, then it's great, But for us, the point is not that we're not selling anything. For us, it's the story that's important.
So true. And I'm an avid fan of Ishi, by the way. I love the essence that you bring out in your stories. Each one looks at bringing out a very unique aspect that probably never has been done before.
Yeah, so we like to present women as human beings, as they say. For a lot of years, women have been objectified, commodified, and they are used as vehicles to sell products. So I think my aim has always been to present women for who they are. They have stories, they have experiences that are of value for us, for the rest of us to listen to. So that has been the aim. And even if I'm talking about a woman-led brand it has come through a PR person, but
Right.
I will be looking at the human angle of it. I'll be looking at her story, her vision, her obstacles, her challenges. And then for me, that is the success story.
Absolutely. And we want you to keep doing more of those.
Yeah.
So, coming back to independent media, can you share with us what were the challenges you faced when you started to build credibility for your venture, especially when budget has to be kept an eye on? What were your challenges and how did you overcome them?
So for me, like you said, when you're in a traditional media, you have that kind of backing and you have those kind of resources. I mean, the last 2, 3 products I've worked with, they were all new launches. So I have almost entire last 15 years of my life, I've worked with new launches and not established companies. But yes, they were new launches by established companies. So we always had the resources to go out with a huge advertising campaign and to promote it and all that. But at the end of the day, what is the point if you're going to, your credibility is lost with the kind of stupid stories that you do, and you're going to lose your reader. So for me, when I started this from day one, I was very clear that I'm not going to go after the numbers, because having the numbers doesn't necessarily mean having the respectability and the credibility that what you're doing is content with integrity. So for me, that has been, and I haven't had those kind of budgets. I'm a former journalist who's trying to now make a media product. I'm trying to learn how to be an entrepreneur. So I've never had those kind of budgets. Everything has been organic. Everything has been driven by the kind of stories that I do. For me, the intention was that each and every story on the website should be something that is representing my brand. Those are my advertisements, actually. The women I'm featuring, they are my brand ambassadors. So, a lot of effort in terms of the integrity and in terms of the honesty and the authenticity of the work that I do. That when tomorrow, if I'm not making money, and this is difficult times for everybody, but I still have a huge sense of satisfaction with what I do, because I know that what I'm doing is authentic, and it's going to take more than a pandemic to put a stop to that, because you're driven by ideals and a vision that is far greater than the bottom line of profitability. So you're creating a vision, actually. You're creating a brand. You're creating something for the long term. For brands like us, only thing to do is to put your head down and work and work and work, and to be consistent, and to make sure that every single story you do is representing you. It's representing what eShe is. Every single story is important, because somebody may read, I may slip up in one story. If I do a bad story, somebody reads that story, they're never going to come back to eShe again. They will be like, this is a stupid website and it's a bad brand. And that's going to define me. That one story would end up defining me. So I can't afford that. For me, every single story has that kind of an input, has my personal touch in it, and my vision is going to come out through that. So I think for small companies which don't have big budgets, you can only create a brand with consistency and doing your best every single day. That there's no other way out. If you're going to start doing stupid things and stupid stunts just for getting a lot of hits, it's over. From that story onwards, it's over.
I agree. Every single story and every click on that story matters. Keeping this in mind, how important is investor attention for you? And is investors support crucial for you to continue to create editorial led content and remain independent? Or do you have to let go of a certain amount of it to accommodate an investor? And are you looking for investment?
In my case, I don't have any investors. I'm a bootstrap startup. I've used up my entire savings on this product. So I personally haven't had to come under anybody else and to give somebody else what they want. So I haven't had those kind of pressures. But of course, not everybody would have, I would say, the blessings that I do in my life. And maybe even I might be in a different situation a few months down from now. I might need to go out there and look for investors. But I'm going to take it as it comes. And for me, it's a little bit more organic. But I would say a lot of media houses out there, from what I know, yes, they do have investors, and they do have people who are watching and keeping an eye on them and watching to see how they go before they're going to invest in them. Sometimes bigger news organizations buy out the smaller news organizations. We see that happening a lot. And that is it. Sometimes it works for the person who has started the company. It works for them because they get to make some money and also run their own product without having to worry about the marketing side of it. But then I don't think you can have it all. And I think if you do come in a position where you're bought over by a larger organization, I think you will lose out some of your editorial freedom, and you will have to follow that brand's editorial policies.
I think that's a conscious call or a compromise that, one has to individually decide. No standard rule for that. So, the media entrepreneur must have been very interesting for you. I want to understand from you your biggest learnings as a media entrepreneur.
I'm still learning. It's every day is a learning experience, and I'm constantly looking for ways to grow. And what I found is that if I'm true to my vision, and if I'm true to what I'm trying to do, which is create a platform for women and to bring out inspirational stories, if I stay true to that, a lot of things flow towards me. I have to plan for it or anything. A lot of good things happen when you follow your vision. And if your vision is to create value in the world, I think you are actually a very attractive force for a lot of people. And I really don't want it any other way. I don't think I would like to pursue any other path for now. I'm quite content doing this, and things may change in a few months from now. I might have new circumstances that force me to look in a new direction. But
Yeah.
at the moment, what I've learned is that the satisfaction and the sense of community you're able to develop by doing good stories and by doing work that really comes from your heart, I think that is really incomparable. And even if tomorrow I have to take on a partner and change my model a little bit, I think these few years of complete editorial freedom is something I'm going to hold very close to my heart.
Yeah, I love the way you put that.
So, Ekta, last question. If you were to hire somebody today, what qualities and qualifications would you look for?
In my case, I'm more of a writer and an editor, and my strength has always been in that. So I would definitely want to look for somebody who's better at business and is able to help me with the business aspects of it and to help me to generate more funds to keep the whole thing going. So for me, it would be those kind of people who would have the opposite skill sets of what I do.
And that's a very wise way of putting it. I've usually heard people say that they want to hire people like them rather than people who are unlike them.
Yeah. But I'm like me, and I can do what I can do. So I need somebody who brings in a different kind of a perspective and a different strengths. I mean, for me, they're very difficult.
Parting shots for PR professionals, your best advice for them.
I think it really helps to be authentic. And when you connect with people, and editors are people too, if you connect with editors in a very authentic way and try to really see what can be of benefit to them as well as you, I think that you'll always have a positive feedback. If you go into the relationship with trying to take something out of it, you're going to be let down. And it may not be just in terms of your profession, but also personally. I think if you enter any relationship with a sense of what do I get out of it, it's destined for doom. But if you go into a relationship with the sense of what can I offer and what can I do and how can I best help this particular person,
Right.
then that it's a long-term relationship.
Absolutely. And that forms the basis of a very solid foundation on which to build a relationship on. Right. And thank you so much, Aekta, for speaking to us today. Love the insights that you shared with us. And we hope to speak to you soon on this.
Thank you so much, Taranjeet, for having me.
So that brings us to the end of another episode of All About PR. And that was Aekta Kapoor giving us an insight into the inner workings of independent media and how PR professionals can incorporate this in their plans. Would also like to take this moment to give a shout out to the good folks at PRPOI. This episode was brought to you via a special arrangement with them. Thank you again for tuning in today, and we will see you next week for another interesting conversation from the world of communication and media.